Hello, I'm Essay, your AI essayist. Please note that all content, audio and video in this presentation are AI generated. As AI can sometimes produce inaccuracies, I encourage you to verify any factual information presented. With that in mind, let's begin.
The intellectual landscape of decision science in the mid-20th century was dominated by the elegant architecture of expected utility theory, a framework of such axiomatic beauty and normative power that its application extended from prescriptive guidance to the descriptive explanation of human choice. It posited a rational agent, a creature of consistent preferences and computational prowess, who maximized utility with an unwavering logic. Into this orderly world, Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky introduced a body of work, crystallized by 1987, that presented a profoundly different portrait of the human decision-maker. Their prospect theory is a landmark of cognitive psychology and the foundational text of behavioral economics, a work whose genius lies in its meticulous, empirically grounded demonstration of how human choices under risk systematically diverge from the tenets of rational theory. This essay will conduct a deep, section-by-section evaluation of the internal claims, mechanisms, and conceptual frameworks presented within their theory, assessing the evidence and the logical coherence of a work that permanently altered our understanding of economic behavior by focusing with unprecedented clarity on how people actually. Section 1. The foundational critique and the editing phase. Prospect theory commences its argument by documenting a series of choice problems where individuals reliably violate the axioms of expected utility. This initial section serves a crucial purpose. It establishes the empirical necessity for a new descriptive model. The authors present evidence, for example, of the certainty effect, where a reduction in the probability of an outcome from 100% to 99% has a far greater psychological impact than a reduction from, say, 25% to 24%. This observation directly challenges the axiom that utilities are weighted by their objective probabilities. The claim here is a powerful one. These irregularities of choice, predictable patterns of deviation, which a comprehensive theory must explain. Having established this empirical beachhead, Kahneman and Tversky propose a two-phase model of the choice process. The first phase, termed the editing phase, is a preliminary analysis of the offered prospects. This phase consists of several mental operations, presented as a cognitive toolkit for simplifying complex choices. The operation of coding involves perceiving outcomes as gains or losses, relative to a neutral reference point, a radical departure from the utility. Models focus on final states of wealth. Combination involves simplifying prospects by combining the probabilities associated with identical outcomes. Segregation involves separating the riskless component of a prospect from its risky components. Cancellation, a particularly insightful operation, involves discarding components that are shared by all prospects under consideration. The evaluation of this claimed editing phase reveals both its explanatory power and its conceptual ambiguity. Its power resides in its ability to account for how different framings of the same problem can lead to different choices, as the editing process itself is contingent on the description of the prospects. The claim that people simplify choices before evaluating them is psychologically intuitive and robust. However, the framework of the editing phase is presented more as a descriptive catalogue of possible operations than a strict, sequentially ordered algorithm. The theory provides little guidance on which editing operation will take precedence in a given situation, making a priori prediction of the final edited prospect a complex undertaking. The core claim that a preliminary, context-dependent simplification precedes evaluation remains a profound and valid insight, forming the necessary groundwork for the theory's subsequent components. Section 2. The asymmetric value function and the principle of reference dependence. Following the editing phase, the decision-maker engages in evaluation, and it is here that Kahneman and Tversky introduced the first of their two central theoretical innovations, the value function. This function replaces the concept of utility with a psychologically richer model of subjective value. The most fundamental claim associated with this function is that it is defined over changes in wealth or welfare, meaning gains and losses, from a specific reference point. This directly operationalizes the editing operation of coding. The reference point itself is typically the current state of affairs, but it can be influenced by expectations or the formulation of the problem, a point of immense consequence. The proposed shape of this value function, when plotted on a graph with outcomes on the horizontal axis and subjective value on the vertical axis, is a distinct curve. This curve possesses three critical properties, each a direct, empirically supported claim about human psychology. First, the function is concave for gains, reflecting the principle of diminishing sensitivity. This means the difference in subjective value between a gain of $100 and a gain of $200 is greater than the difference between a gain of $1,100 and a gain of $1,200. This concavity in the domain of gains accounts for the common observation of risk aversion in choices involving sure gains versus larger, probabilistic gains. Second, the function is convex for losses. This mirrors the principle of diminishing sensitivity. In the negative domain, the difference in subjective value between a loss of $100 and a loss of $200 is greater than the difference between a loss of $1,100 and a loss of $1,200. This convexity in the loss domain leads to the prediction of risk-taking behavior, where individuals might prefer a gamble with a chance of a large loss over a sure smaller loss. The third and perhaps most significant claim embedded in the value function is the principle of loss aversion. This curve is demonstrably steeper in the domain of losses than it is in the domain of gains. The claim is that losses loom larger than corresponding gains. The pain of losing $100 is psychologically more potent than the pleasure of winning $100. Kahneman and Tversky support this with simple but compelling thought experiments, such as the general unwillingness of people to accept a 50-50 bet to either win $110 or lose $100. The evidence they marshal for this asymmetric value function is robust, derived from numerous controlled experiments showing predictable reversals of risk attitude based entirely on whether the outcomes are framed as gains or losses. The evaluation of this component finds it to be the bedrock of the theory's explanatory power, providing a single, coherent mechanism for a wide range of previously anomalous economic behaviors. Section 3. The nonlinear transformation of probability through the decision-weighting function. Having redefined the valuation of outcomes, Kahneman and Tversky turn their analytical lens to the second major component of the decision process, the treatment of probabilities. In expected utility theory, outcomes are weighted by their objective probabilities. Prospect theory makes the radical claim that people use decision weights, which are a non-linear transformation of these probabilities. This is captured in the decision weighting function, which relates objective probability, denoted P, to a subjective decision weight, denoted pi of p. The function they propose has several defining characteristics, each representing a claim about cognitive biases in the perception of chance. First, the function is an increasing function of probability, meaning that higher probabilities correspond to higher decision weights. This is consistent with basic intuition. However, the relationship is profoundly non-linear. The most striking claim is that the decision weighting function overweights very small probabilities. A 1% chance of winning a large prize is given a decision weight that is disproportionately larger than 1% of the weight given to certainty. This feature elegantly explains the immense appeal of lotteries and long-shot gambles, where the small possibility of a massive gain is inflated in the psychological calculus of the decision-maker. Conversely, the function claims that moderate and high probabilities are generally underweighted. This underweighting, combined with the concavity of the value function for gains, provides a powerful explanation for risk aversion in favorable gambles. An even more profound feature is what occurs at the endpoints. The function asserts that the weight for a probability of 0 is 0 and the weight for a probability of 1 is 1. However, the function exhibits a sharp discontinuity near these endpoints. A tiny probability is overweighted, but the transition from a very small probability to absolute impossibility is a categorical leap. Similarly, the jump from a high probability, like 99%, to absolute certainty at 100% carries a disproportionately large increase in the decision weight. This is the mechanism behind the previously mentioned certainty effect. The preference for a sure thing over a 99% chance of the same outcome is explained by this categorical jump in the decision weight at the boundary of certainty. The evaluation of this component reveals its critical role in resolving paradoxes like the Allais paradox, which remained a persistent thorn in the side of expected utility theory. The claim that probabilities are processed through a subjective, distorting lens is a powerful departure from the rational model, grounded once again in a careful reading of empirical choice data. It adds a second layer of psychological realism, working in concert with the value function to model the intricate dance of risk perception. Section 4 Framing effects and the refutation of invariance, while the value function and weighting function provide the core computational engine of prospect theory. The concept of framing effects represents its most direct assault on a fundamental axiom of rational choice, the principle of invariance. The invariance axiom states that the way a choice is presented should have no bearing on the preference between options, provided the underlying outcomes and probabilities remain identical. In a series of seminal studies, most famously the Asian disease problem published in the years leading up to 1987, Kahneman and Tversky deliver a devastating empirical refutation of this principle. The claim is that variations in the presentation of a choice problem can systematically alter the choices people make. In the Asian disease problem, participants are asked to choose between two programs to combat a disease expected to kill 600 people in one frame. The options are presented in terms of lives saved. Program A saves 200 people for sure, while program B has a 1/3 probability of saving all 600 and a 2/3 probability of saving no one. A majority of participants choose the certain option, program A, demonstrating risk aversion for gains. In the second frame, the identical problem is presented in terms of lives lost. Program C results in 400 people dying for sure, while program D offers a 1/3 probability that nobody will die and a 2/3 probability that 600 people will die. In this frame, a large majority of participants choose the gamble, program D, demonstrating risk-taking behavior for losses. The objective outcomes are identical across both frames. Program A is the same as program C. Program B is the same as program D. The only difference is the verbal framing, which shifts the reference point. The lives saved frame establishes a reference point of 0 saved, making the outcomes gains. The lives lost frame establishes a reference point of 0 deaths, making the outcomes losses. The observed reversal of preference is precisely what prospect theory predicts via its S-shaped value function, which is concave for gains and convex for losses. The evaluation of this claim is straightforward. The evidence is overwhelming and easily replicable. The framing effect is one of the most robust findings in social science. Its implications are profound. It suggests that the editing phase, where the reference point is established, is a critical and highly malleable stage of decision-making. It refutes the idea of stable, underlying preferences that are merely revealed by choice. Instead, preferences are constructed, at least in part, in the moment of choice, heavily influenced by the language and context provided. This claim moves prospect theory from a mere correction of utility theory into a fundamentally different paradigm of choice, one where the architecture of the problem itself is a determinant of the outcome. Section 5 Synthesizing the components into the fourfold pattern of risk attitudes. The ultimate intellectual achievement of prospect theory is its ability to synthesize its core components, reference-dependent value function, and the non-linear decision weighting function into a single, coherent, predictive framework known as the fourfold pattern of risk attitudes. This pattern resolves a host of seemingly contradictory behaviors that had puzzled decision theorists for decades. The framework makes specific claims about risk attitudes in four distinct situations, defined by the intersection of outcome, domain gains or losses, and probability level high or low. First, for gains with high probabilities, a theory predicts risk aversion. This arises because the concavity of the value function in the domain of gains diminishing sensitivity to increasing gains dominates the underweighting of high probabilities. People will thus tend to prefer a sure gain over a gamble with a slightly higher expected value. Second, for gains with low probabilities, a theory predicts risk-seeking behavior. Here, the overweighting of small probabilities by the decision weighting function dominates the concavity of the value function. This explains the appeal of lottery tickets, where people pay a premium for a tiny chance at a large gain. Third, for losses with high probabilities, the theory predicts risk-seeking behavior. This is a consequence of the convexity of the value function in the loss domain. Faced with a high probability of a substantial loss, people become willing to take a chance on a gamble that might avert the loss entirely, even if the gamble involves a small chance of an even worse outcome. This explains why a desperate gambler might double down on a bad bet. Fourth, for losses with low probabilities, the theory predicts risk aversion. Here, the strong overweighting of small probabilities makes the prospect of a catastrophic loss highly salient and aversive, even if the chance is remote. This combination of the value function and the weighting function provides the psychological rationale for purchasing insurance, where one pays a certain small loss the premium, to eliminate a small probability of a very large loss. The evaluation of this synthesized fourfold pattern reveals it to be the theory's crowning achievement. It offers a parsimonious yet powerful taxonomy of risk behavior that accounts for phenomena that expected utility theory could only address with ad hoc modifications. The claim that these four distinct risk attitudes emerge from the interplay of just two psychological functions is a testament to the theory's elegance and explanatory depth. It demonstrates that the same individual can be both risk-averse and risk-seeking, depending entirely on the context of the decision. A nuanced and realistic portrait of human economic psychology. In conclusion, the body of work on prospect theory presented by Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky stands as a monumental achievement in the science of human decision-making. A close evaluation of its internal claims reveals a meticulously constructed argument, built piece by piece upon a foundation of ingenious empirical observation. The theory's initial critique of expected utility gives way to a constructive model that introduces the psychologically resonant concepts of an editing phase and reference-dependent valuation. The asymmetric, A-shaped value function provides a compelling mechanism for loss aversion and the mirrored risk attitudes for gains and losses. This is complemented by the decision weighting function, which captures the subjective and nonlinear perception of probability, explaining the allure of lotteries and the power of certainty. When assembled, these components not only explain a vast array of behavioral paradoxes through the elegant fourfold pattern of risk, but also fundamentally challenge the normative axiom of invariance through the powerful demonstration of framing effects. The work's enduring significance resides in its successful fusion of psychological insight with economic modeling, creating a descriptive theory of choice that honors the complex and often counterintuitive realities of human cognition. It moved the study of choice from an exclusive focus on how idealized agents ought to behave to a rigorous investigation of how people do behave, thereby providing the intellectual charter for the entire field of behavioral economics and securing a permanent place for cognitive psychology in the discourse of human rationality.
We really appreciate you tuning into this AI-powered presentation. Our goal is to push the boundaries of AI in content creation, and your input is invaluable. If there's a particular subject you'd like to see us tackle next, or if you have suggestions on how we could fine-tune our AI's creative prompts, please don't hesitate to leave your ideas in the comments section. We're excited to bring you more unique content very soon.